Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It's January 27th, 2026. If you're listening to this, you've probably seen the headlines, you've seen the maps, and if you're like me, you're probably trying to figure out how we got here. Today, we're not doing a light episode. We are staring directly into the abyss of modern strategy.
It's heavy reading, I won't lie.
Yeah.
But it's necessary. We're looking at reports on Russian strategy up to late 2025, dossiers on the Sino-Russian axis, and some very granular analyses of U.S. foreign policy.
And what stands out, right away, is a term that completely flips the script on what we thought we knew about nuclear weapons. They call it the open nuclear umbrella.
Right. It takes the Cold War textbook, which we all sort of internalized, and just throws it right out the window.
See, when I hear nuclear umbrella, I think safety. A shield. The U.S. has one over Japan, over NATO. It means, if you get rained on or nuked, I'll cover you. It's defensive.
That's the traditional definition, extended deterrence.
Yeah.
It's designed to keep the status quo frozen. But what these sources identify in Russian strategy, well, it's a total perversion of that concept.
How so?
Russia wasn't using nuclear weapons to deter an attack on Russia. They were using the threat of them to shield their own invasion of a neighbor.
So wait, let me get this straight. It's not a shield for the defender, it's a shield for the attacker.
Precisely. It creates a, quote, safe space for conventional violence.
That is a deeply disturbing image. It's like holding a shield up so you can stab someone without anyone interfering.
That's almost exactly how the sources describe it. They call it compellent deterrence. And to understand where we are today in 2026, we have to unpack three things.
Okay.
First, how this actually worked, because, spoiler alert, no nukes were actually fired. Second, how it fits into this massive global strategy they call the minimization plan.
And third,
the controversial Uno-Russian reverse card that military theorists are arguing we should have played.
I love that name. Uno-Russian reverse. It sounds like a meme, but I have a feeling the reality is a lot less funny.
It is a lot less funny.
Okay, let's start with the umbrella. You used the term compellent deterrence. How is that different from just regular deterrence?
Think about the direction of the energy. Traditional deterrence is passive. It says, don't hit me. It's a do not enter sign.
Right.
Compellent deterrence is active. It says, I am taking this, I'm changing the map, and if you try to stop me effectively, I will escalate to nuclear war.
It's coercion. It's holding the room hostage while you rob the safe.
Exactly. It's designed to paralyze third-party intervention. But here's the thing I want to challenge you on. Did it work?
Well, that's the debate, isn't it? Because I look back at 22, 23, 24. We heard the threats constantly, face consequences you've never seen.
All the time.
But the West did interfere. We sent HIMARS, we sent tanks, ATACMS, F-16s. The apocalypse didn't happen. So my instinct is to say the bluff failed.
That's the common take, but the sources argue it's wrong. They describe this phenomenon called bluff decay.
Bluff decay, like in poker.
Similar idea. Initially, Russia used words. Red lines, don't send missiles. The West crossed the line. Nothing happened. Don't send tanks. The West crossed it. Nothing.
So the threats lost their power.
Their potency, yeah. The bluff decayed because the red lines were just stepped over without consequence.
So if the bluff decays, doesn't the whole strategy collapse?
In a normal game, yes. But here, the sources argue Russia entered a credibility ratchet. Because their words stopped working, they had to ratchet up their actions to be believed.
So they had to move from saying to doing just to keep the fear alive.
Exactly.
What does that look like in practice? Because, again, no mushroom clouds.
No, but look at November 2024, the test of the Rhizomatic hypersonic missile.
I remember that vividly. It hit Dnipro. It wasn't a nuke, but it felt different.
It was a message, a missile capable of carrying multiple nuclear warheads, used conventionally. The message was, we have the delivery system and we can hit you before you even see it coming.
A kinetic demonstration.
Yes. Same with suspending the New START treaty. They were physically dismantling the safety guardrails to show they were willing to crash the car.
Okay, but I'm still stuck on the results. We're sitting here in 2026. The West sent the aid. So the umbrella failed to stop the weapons.
It failed to stop them, but the sources are adamant about this. It successfully slowed them down. And in a war of attrition, time is the only resource that matters.
So the delay. The delay was the victory.
Exactly. Think about the debates in Congress, the hesitation in Berlin. Every time a new weapon system was proposed, there was a 3-month, a 6-month delay. Why?
Escalation management. Fear of the umbrella.
Right. And that delay bought Russia a critical time to dig in, to build the Surovikin lines, to mine the front. It didn't stop the war, but it shaped the pace of the war. It turned a dynamic conflict into a grinder.
And that leads us right to the second big concept, the minimization plan, because a grinder sounds terrible for everyone involved, including Russia.
Oh, it is. But the sources argue the grinder was the point. The minimization plan is described as a grand strategy, orchestrated by the Sino-Russian axis. The goal wasn't a quick victory.
What was it then?
Strategic exhaustion of the West.
Strategic exhaustion. So just tiring us out until we quit.
Bankrupting you. Draining your stockpiles. Breaking your political will. In this model, Russia is described as the battering ram.
The battering ram.
They're the kinetic force. They're the ones physically smashing their face into the NATO security architecture. But look at the logistics behind the ram. The sources highlight this rhizomatic network of attrition.
Rhizomatic, that's a botanical term, right? Like a root system.
Exactly. Like ginger. It spreads underground, interconnected. It's not just Russia fighting. It's a network designed to suck the U.S. defense industrial base dry. You have North Korea supplying, get this, 12 million artillery shells.
12 million. That's a staggering amount of metal.
It is World War I levels of production. You have Iran supplying drones. You have dual-use components flowing from China. And the calculation is just this ruthless cost-benefit analysis.
How so?
Every Patriot missile, which costs millions, that the U.S. sends to shoot down a cheap Iranian drone is a net loss for the U.S. Treasury. And more importantly, it's one less Patriot available for, say, Taiwan.
So the Sino part of the Sino-Russian axis is looking at this and saying, great, let Russia chew up the American inventory so the cupboards are bare when we make our moves.
Precisely. Russia is the battering ram, absorbing the pain to exhaust the West. But I have to ask you, does being a battering ram sound like a good job?
No, that's what I don't get.
Oh, yeah.
You smash your head against a wall, you get a concussion. Russia has taken massive, massive losses. How does this make sense for them?
This is the darkest part of the analysis, and I mean really dark. You asked if it makes sense. For the Russian nation, arguably no. But for the regime, the sources argue yes.
Explain that distinction.
The sources estimate, and this data goes up to mid-2025, over 1 million Russian casualties, plus another 600,000 to 900,000 immigrants.
That's nearly 2 million men gone from the workforce, from the gene pool.
But look at who they are, mostly young, educated urban men, or ethnic minorities from the periphery. The exact demographic most likely to organize a revolution or demand change.
Wait. You're saying the casualties are a feature, not a bug.
The sources call it a demographic reset. By feeding this generation into the meat grinder or forcing the liberal-minded ones to flee, Putin effectively purged the internal threat.
He's creating a smaller, weaker Russia, but one that he can control completely.
A more governable Russia. He is securing the regime by burning down the future of the nation. It's a cynical, brutal calculus, but it explains why they kept going when Western analysts said they can't sustain this.
They weren't trying to sustain the nation, they were sustaining the power structure.
That is the battering ram role. And while Russia was doing that in Europe, the political situation in the U.S. during 2025, well, it played right into their hands. This is where strategic exhaustion met strategic incoherence.
Right, let's talk about 2025. The sources describe this period in U.S. politics as pivotal. We saw the return of Donald Trump to the presidency. And look, we're not here to do a partisan debate, but the sources map out a very specific pattern.
They do, a pattern they call the Tomahawk Gambit.
The Tomahawk Gambit. Unpack that for us.
So throughout 2025, you see this cycle. President Trump would get frustrated, maybe the war wasn't ending as fast as he promised, and he would threaten massive escalation. He'd say, I'm sending Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine.
Which is a huge escalation. That's putting Moscow in the crosshairs.
Massive. But then almost immediately, there would be a phone call. The sources cite a specific one, October 17th, 2025, a 2.5-hour call between Trump and Putin.
And after the call?
The threat disappears. The policy shifts back toward a ceasefire in place.
So the threat wasn't real? Or was it just negotiable?
The sources argue it wasn't credible. This pattern showed Moscow that U.S. policy wasn't based on some fixed strategic interest. It was based on personal negotiation. It was transactional.
And if it's transactional, you can make a deal.
Exactly. And that strategic incoherence, threatening fire and fury one day, talking peace the next, meant the U.S. effectively benched itself. The chaos in Washington was the cover Russia needed to cement their gains.
And that leads us to the peace deal at the Alaska summit in August 2025.
Right. The deal that essentially froze the conflict along the current battle lines.
Which leaves Russia with what?
About 20% of Ukraine, and a guarantee that Ukraine is blocked from NATO.
So let's zoom out. Russia threatens nukes to keep us away. They invade a neighbor. They take a fifth of the country. They purge their own population to secure the regime. And the deal is, they get to keep it.
That is the conclusion the sources draw. They argue this validates the open nuclear umbrella. It proves that if you have nukes, you can conquer territory. The world will eventually just ratify your conquest to avoid escalation.
It rewards the aggressor.
It codifies that nuclear blackmail works.
Which brings us to the countermove. Because surely, military strategists weren't just sitting on their hands watching this. The sources mention something called the Sino-Russian reverse card.
They do. And it's not just a clever name. It's a fundamental critique of how the West handled this. The open nuclear umbrella relies on one thing: the West being self-deterred. We're afraid of their nukes.
So the reverse is about flipping that fear back on them.
It's about reasserting mutually assured destruction.
Mad.
Mad. The old Cold War classic. 2 scorpions in a bottle.
It's the only logic that holds up. The theory is, if an aggressor says, "Don't help Ukraine or I'll nuke you," the response cannot be silence. It must be a symmetrical counterthreat.
What does that sound like in the Situation Room?
It sounds like, we will help them, and if you use a tactical nuke in Ukraine, we enter the war conventionally and destroy your army. If you nuke a NATO city, we nuke Moscow.
Simple, but absolutely terrifying.
It requires nerves of steel. And here's the catch. The sources call it the credibility paradox. Because would we? I mean, would the U.S. actually trade New York for Kiev?
That is the question Putin is betting on. It's very hard for a democracy to credibly threaten nuclear war over a non-NATO country. Russia's survival, or at least the regime's, is at risk, so their threat feels real. Ours feels like a bluff.
So is the reverse card just a fantasy? Or is there a way to make it work?
The sources argue the reverse isn't just about nuclear threats, it has to be total. They talk about radical strategic sovereignty.
That sounds economic.
It is. The minimization plan works because the West is economically entangled with the very axis trying to destroy it. We rely on Russia and China for resources, for manufacturing. We're funding the battering ram.
So radical strategic sovereignty implies
What?
Cutting the cord?
Completely, a total severance. The sources argue that escalation management, that cautious approach, actually enabled the aggression. A true counter-strategy means stopping the management of fear.
It means forcing the aggressor to worry about their survival.
Yes, it shifts the burden of anxiety. Right now, the West is anxious about escalation. The reverse strategy is about making Moscow and Beijing anxious about their own continued existence.
But looking at the 2025 timeline, we didn't do that.
No. We chose the path of least resistance. The Tomahawk Gambit, loud threats, followed by quiet deals.
So we have the open nuclear umbrella allowing conquest, the minimization plan exhausting the West, and a political situation in 2025 that validated it all. What does this mean for the listener? Why should they care about a peace deal that happened 6 months ago?
Because of the moral hazard.
Unpack that.
If the open nuclear umbrella succeeds, if Russia keeps that 20% of Ukraine and faces no existential consequence, the lesson is crystal clear for every other nation on Earth.
Get nukes.
Get nukes immediately. If you want to be safe from invasion, get nukes. If you want to invade your neighbor and stop the U.S. from intervening, get nukes.
So we aren't just looking at the end of the Ukraine war. We're looking at the starting gun for a new nuclear arms race.
A proliferation era like we've never seen. Every mid-sized power, South Korea, Japan, Poland, Saudi Arabia, Iran, they will all look at Ukraine and say, they gave up their nukes and got invaded. Russia kept theirs and got to redraw the map.
The rational choice becomes proliferation.
And that's a terrifying world, a world where every regional conflict has a nuclear shadow over it.
It is.
And that's why the sources argue the minimization plan is so dangerous. It's not just about shifting borders in the Donbass, it's about dismantling the taboos that have kept us from nuclear war for 80 years.
We've covered a lot of ground. The shield becoming a sword, the battering ram and that cynical demographic reset, the Tomahawk Gambit, and how political chaos gave cover to this strategy.
It is a lot to process.
It is. But it's vital to understand, because when you see a headline about a peace deal or a ceasefire, you need to look at who's holding the umbrella.
And you have to ask yourself what's being sheltered underneath it. Is it peace? Or is it just the preparation for the next round?
That's the question. Before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final thought from the sources that really stuck with me. We talked about the umbrella being offensive. But there's a flip side. If the only way to be safe is to have your own umbrella, are we entering an era where there are no neutrals? Where you are either under a nuclear shield or you are a target?
That's the ultimate question of the minimization era, and I think we are already seeing the answer.
Something to think about as we watch the world map change. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.